All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. We are live and ready for action. What up, everybody? I see everyone sort of already started their little chit chat in the chat. You guys ready for evolution exam tomorrow? Evolution, one of those topics that can be a little tricky, but I think overall evolution, once you kind of understand, the most important point is to understand the basic theory, and I think you'd be pretty good to go. But there's a lot of little details too that are probably important for us to remember that can be harder. So I'm open for any questions related to anything here. Just kind of some context. We have an A level is going to be a VIST response, so some sort of general VIST like we've practiced with, so that's pretty straightforward. What else? Expect there to be a few questions from all the sort of different things we've studied. Things especially around human evolution, some of those cases like lactase persistence or skin color. So you should kind of know those case studies. You should also be able to do a little bit of vocab matching, right? So, or not necessarily matching or fill in the blank with some of the vocab. So I would study some of that vocabulary. Just to help you with those kinds of C-level questions where it might ask you, this is an example of, right? And so you should know like what convergent evolution is, or homologous structures, or adaptive radiation. So the thing about evolution is there's the theory of it, which is just sort of the general idea of natural selection and the whole VIST thing, which is what your A level is about. But then there's some of the details with some of the vocab. So you should be comfortable knowing these different terms to help you with the C-level questions. And then the B-level questions, those are always going to be the trickier ones because they have the multiples, right? Where it's like, which of the following? It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. So those you have to kind of be able to put a bunch of stuff together. So as far as this test, I would say if you're trying to get your most bang for your buck, first of all, just be able to do a VIST response. Slide this guy over a little bit. First of all, just be able to do a VIST response because that's where your A level is going to come from. Work on some of those vocab terms to give you some help with the C levels. And then for the B levels is you want to be able to sort of put together some of those things. Maybe answer questions about some specifics like antibiotic resistance for sure will be on there. Some of the human bio stuff. We talked about cultural evolution, skin color. So yeah, that's kind of just a preface there. Alicia, you hate evolution? Well, you hate it mainly probably because you have to learn it for a test right now, but it's actually if you could learn it on your own and sort of appreciate it, I think you'd be surprised that it's actually kind of interesting and you might enjoy it. What's up, Mr. Chang? Nice to see you again. Let's talk a little bit here. Tanusha has a question about the different phases of human evolution. So basically the way you want to go about this with human evolution, the phases, we in the video we watched, the key that you want to remember for human evolution are those three important things. The fact that we have bipedality, right, evolving early in human history. So you have humans and chimps have a common ancestor about 6 to 7 million years ago, right? So they branch off. Chimps evolve this way, humans evolve this way. Along that evolutionary path towards modern day humans, you have these pre-human species like Ardi or Lucy, which is like an Australopithecus species. Along the way, you get an evolution of three important traits. You need to know early is bipedality. That's the first sort of major milestone that happens early on. Then after bipedality, you start to see two other important traits. You see the evolution of tool use and the evolution of, or the cultural evolution of tool use, accompanied by the biological evolution by increased brain size. And those occur a few million years after bipedality, and we see those in places like Lucy, for example. Happy Gator, good question. What are the random and non-random parts? There's one random part and one non-random part to evolution. So the random part of evolution is the mutations or the crossing over. So the variation that is created is random. So those mutations that create a new combination, or the fact that certain alleles are passed like which allele of the two. So you have two alleles, right? Like for eye color, let's say you have a blue allele and a brown allele, just for a basic. It's random which of those two alleles you would pass on to your offspring. It's also random what kind of mutations can occur to change those alleles. That's the random part. The non-random part of evolution is natural selection. It's which of those mutations, which of the variation is selected for by the environment. That is the non-random part of evolution. So when people talk about evolution and they say, I don't believe that something like the eye could have evolved randomly, that means that they don't really have an understanding of evolution. The eye did not evolve randomly. Some of the mutations that led to the evolution of the eye were random, but they were selected for non-randomly by the environment. Dog Rusty Gaming, will any of the materials from the first evolution quiz be reused in this quiz? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of overlap between the two quizzes. Not necessarily the same exact questions, but the same material for sure, content-wise. Happy Gator, do we know what the common ancestor of humans and chimps looked like? No, we don't really have a perfect, we don't really know. We can make guesses, sort of. It probably looked something similar to like Artie, but we don't really know what they looked like. We have skeletons and some pieces here and there, but like a perfect picture of what it looks like, no, not exactly. Not exactly. Maggie on 15-3 of which said the fossils found. It said that fossils found that certain organisms had similar bone structures. Are those analogous? So so an analogous structure would not be similar bone structure, Maggie. That would be homologous. So analogous structures are ones in which you have like the wing of a bird and the wing of a fly. These two both good for flying, but they do not come from the same common ancestor. So for example, insects like flies evolved the wing separately from birds that evolved their wing. So you can't go and take flies and birds and trace them back to a common ancestor that also had a wing. No. They have a common ancestor, yes, somewhere in the past, but they didn't have wings necessarily. The evolution of the wing is in two separate situations. That's an analogous structure, right? It has the same function, but slightly different underlying structure to it. If you have two organisms, you find their fossils, and they have similar bone structures, but different functions, that's homologous. I'm going to pull up a picture here because this is a classic one that people get confused on all the time. And I'm just going to leave this here for a little bit for people that are coming in to look at. Analogous on the left, homologous on the right. These are two different things. Anusha, what do we need to know for cladograms? Well, you need to know how to read them. So if I show you a picture of a cladogram, you need to know which, let's just pull up a cladogram real quick as well. So if I give you a cladogram, let's say something like this is the one that I used in the review packet. So I give you something simple like this guy, this kind of a cladogram. I might ask you a question about it, right? Like, okay, which two organisms are most closely related? On this, you should know that based off of this, the rodents and rabbits and primates are most closely related, as well as the crocodiles and birds, because the branching point of those two is closest to each other. The least related on this would be like birds and sharks, because they have the furthest back branching point. And then you should also kind of be aware that when you have a line here saying like amniotic egg, everything after that has this trait and everything before it does not. So that's kind of the two main things you need to get out of a cladogram. You need to understand that as you go along the diagram, new traits are appearing and evolving. Everything after that has that trait, everything before it does not. Let's see, Mary Jane Lee, you asked, can you explain each part of VIST? Why each part of VIST is necessary for evolution? Well, I wouldn't, I mean, yeah, so I'll go through it and let's see, Amol, you kind of answered it here. Without variation, there's only one trait. Without inheritance, it cannot be passed through. Yeah, so Amol, you kind of just did it in a real quick way, but just to sort of elaborate on that, the idea of VIST is you need each part because in order for a trait to evolve over time, you need the variation because there has to be some differences between individuals. If every individual was the same exactly and there was no variation in the trait, then there is nothing, there's one version is not better than the other, and one version does not give an advantage over another, so there's nothing to select from, right? There's nothing, you have to have some differences in order for the environment to select the ones that are better. If everything is the same, then there's nothing to select. They're all the same, there's no evolution going to be possible. You have to have some differences to start with. Some of them are going to be slightly better fit for the environment and some of them are worse. So you need that variation initially to get the whole thing going. The inheritance part, I think, is hopefully relatively obvious. The trait that you're selecting needs to be able to be passed down from one generation to the next in order for it to become more common in the population. So if a trait is not inherited, meaning it's not genetic, then there's no way for an organism to pass it on to the next generation. And if an organism can't pass it on, then that trait disappears when that organism dies and doesn't get inherited to the next generation. For evolution to occur, you need that trait to get inherited to successive generations over time, and as they reproduce, that trait becomes more and more and more common in the population. So you have to have an inherited trait. And then for S, you need some sort of selection pressure, because without selection, then there's no evolution doesn't occur in any sort of directional way, because selection is what distinguishes better and worse. So if there's no selection, then all traits are equal, and you can't evolve towards any sort of trait if there's no selection for one over the other, or one version of a trait over the other. So there has to be some difference in which traits provide more survival and reproductive opportunities, and those are the ones that are selected for. So there has to be some selection. And then time, you just need there to be enough time to pass for generation after generation to go by so that that trait spreads throughout the population and becomes more common. So you just have to have a factor of time. So Aristotle, just look at this diagram to answer your question about analogous versus homologous structures. I already did that. Take a look at that. So this diagram is a good hint there. And it looks like some people have answered your questions. Let's see, what is the line between micro and macro evolution? There's no distinct line, so to speak. You're just looking at trait, like a micro evolution would be like any trait that has slightly changed would be considered microevolution. But like if you have a whole entire organism that has changed, that would be considered macroevolution. So the scale of the evolution is kind of what we're looking for. Minor changes that don't really create new species are on the micro scale. Large changes that could end up creating an entirely new species would be considered macroevolution, or changes to traits that require a long period of time to change. Yeah, good. Joseph answered it pretty well as well, right? Small changes in the frequencies of alleles is micro, right? New species forming is definitely macro. Yeah, Maggie, good job. That's also correct. Anisha, what causes mimicry? Well, I mean, evolution, right? Evolution is what actually causes mimicry, um, in the sense that like you have to have an organism is selected for that looks like another organism, right? That mimics another organism, because by looking like that, it gains some sort of advantage, right? So if a snake is not poisonous, but it looks like a poisonous snake, it will be less likely to be eaten or attacked or threatened because of the built-in fear, maybe, or whatever, of other organisms not wanting to get poisoned by that snake. So the snake can sort of hijack another species' poison ability by looking like it, and so that can give it a selective advantage. So over time, it would be selected for because it's more likely to survive and reproduce, as it's getting more of those predators may avoid it, because it looks like an actual organism that has a threat. Yeah, so genetic equilibrium. Yeah. What are the 5 conditions? Yeah. Does anyone list them out? Let's see. Dog Rusty, non-random mating, or sorry, random mating. No, for genetic equilibrium to occur, you have to have random mating. You have to. So I'm seeing like Amol and Dog Rusty, you both wrote no random mating or non-random mating. That would be, you have to have random mating. Random mating would cause genetic equilibrium. Non-random mating means that there's some sort of selection going on between mating pairs, which would infer some sort of evolution taking place, as there's a desired mate to reproduce with. So there's some sort of sexual selection happening. So there has to be non-random. It has to be random mating. It's random. So you have random mating, no immigration or emigration. So no organisms leaving or coming into the population. That's true. So random mating, no immigration or emigration. You need to have a large population size so that genetic drift doesn't occur, right? So larger populations tend not to do genetic drift as much. You need to have no selection pressure, so the environment cannot be selecting any traits. And then the 5th one is, what did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss? Oh yeah, no mutations. No mutations. There cannot be any mutation occurring either. Now, those are the 5 things, but keep in mind that those don't occur in nature, so you end up with a situation in nature that is never genetic equilibrium. Genetic equilibrium is just sort of a theoretical idea. So any population is never going to, in a natural setting, will not be in genetic equilibrium. One of those 5 things will not be met. And in fact, most of the time, all 5 of them are not met. Most populations don't necessarily have to be large. There can be a lot of small populations. There's always going to be mutations, right? Always going to be mutations because organisms are exposed to UV light. Meiosis and mitosis make mistakes. There's always going to be, for the most part, there's non-random mating. Usually there's some sort of selection, mate selection happening. There's some traits that are desirable by the opposite sex. There's always natural selection because the environment is constantly changing. So some traits are going to be advantageous over others. And there's always going to be emigration, maybe not always emigration. Immigration is possible to have an isolated population, But most populations do have individuals coming and going from it, and you get some gene flow. So, overall, it's impossible to have genetic equilibrium in a real life situation. Anisha, can I explain generation time? Yeah. Generation time, all that generation time is talking about is the time it takes for an organism to reproduce and create the next generation. So for example, bacteria can create another bacteria within a very short period of time. So like, let's say like within, a couple days or even one day, a bacteria can reproduce. And what that means is that we'll create a new generation by mitosis. Humans, our generation time is more like 15 to 20 years, maybe longer, depending on when people reproduce. But the idea would be like a human has a longer generation time because we reproduce slower than something like a bacteria. Eileen, what do we specifically need for the evolution of humans? Eileen, for evolution of humans, you do need to know the 3 milestone traits like bipedality, increased brain size, and tool use. Those all you should know, and they are found in that video that we watched in that handout on human evolution. So refer back to that to know what you need to know for the test. Let's see. There's a question there about punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium is essentially this idea where you have periods of time where you have rapid evolution and other periods of time where you have relatively slow evolution. So this is let me show you like this picture right here. In this case, the left diagram, the left graph, would be considered something called gradualism. Gradualism meaning like a species will evolve at a steady rate over time. So species 1 evolves into species 2, evolves into species 3 at a steady rate. Punctuated equilibrium is the right side of the graph, where you have like rapid evolution, and then it kind of stays the same, and then rapid evolution, and stays the same. So it's more of this like spurt and up and down motion, which is what scientists believe is more realistic of the way evolution works, is the graph on the right, not the left. And it makes sense because environments go through periods of time where they change rapidly and then they kind of stay the same. And then they change rapidly and they kind of stay the same. So you would get this sort of like response of species evolving to adapt to those changes. So when the environment changes quickly, species adapt quickly and evolve quickly. And then everything kind of stays kind of steady and then evolves quickly. And yes, viruses do evolve. Viruses do evolve. Thus we need vaccines, because every year the flu evolves and changes its mutations cause it to change, and so we need to create a new vaccine for the new flu, the new strains in that year. And Catherine, yeah, homologous and analogous structures, the best way to remember it is think about, I mean, I have this picture here. The way I like to think about it is analogous is the same function, different structure. Homologous, same structure, different function. Now, you have to figure out a way that you can keep that straight in your head, because that is easy to switch, but you just got to nail it, just got to get it down. There's no other way to really to get around it, really. Derek, what's up, Derek? What's the difference between cultural and biological evolution? I mean, remember we talked in class about this kind of the key idea here is that cultural evolution is a relatively unique human aspect, and cultural evolution is when, remember I used the word memes. So we have these. So when with biological evolution, we have a gene or a series of genes that change over time as they get mutations. The beneficial versions of these genes are selected for, and over time you have this physical structure, this physical thing, which is a gene, which is made of DNA. It's an actual physical molecule that changes over time and creates different traits in organisms. And so you have this physical evolution taking place within a gene. Cultural evolution has a meme, which is like language or religion. And for those of you that didn't hear me talk about this in my class, if you're coming from another class and you're hearing me talk about a meme, remember that the memes we think about right now, like the memes that we enjoy and you know that are the humorous kind of meme, are just a subset of what the real definition of the word meme is any sort of social creation that is passed from one generation to the next by human culture. So, for example, some of the original memes were things like cooking, or hunting, or pastoralism. Some of the newer memes are things like medicine and technology, art, religion. All of these are memes because they're created by humans in our culture, and they can be passed from one generation to the next and changed and modified over time, right? Religions can slowly change, art changes, medicine gets improves, but there's no physical structure. These are ideas. And so that's important to remember, and that's kind of the key difference between cultural and biological evolution. Now, the thing is, memes can influence genes. So the way I like to think about it is memes are created by humans in our culture, and those memes go on to change our genes, just like we talked about with the lactase persistence example. We have this meme or this cultural idea of raising animals and drinking their milk. That meme influences our biology because those individuals that can drink the milk without having gas and digestive issues typically survive and reproduce more. And so therefore, over time, the gene for lactase becomes more and more common. That mutation that allows lactase to be produced becomes more common. So the meme of pastoralism and drinking milk causes the gene for lactase to stay on and be produced later. So culture influences biology. Memes influence genes. Let's see. So let's see. There's a question here. The real Akash, is death/extinction by memes possible? For sure, 100%. Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. I would argue that if humans go extinct, it could be a result of human memes, for sure. So I want you to think about what's the biggest threat to human survival right now is probably the impending change of the climate due to human activity. So humans created the meme of mining for coal and drilling for oil to use as an energy source, which releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which heats the earth, which causes global warming and leads to climate change. And if climate change gets too severe, species go extinct, and eventually humans can die and go extinct from that kind of change. So the meme of extracting coal and oil and other fossil fuels to use as an energy source could lead to the extinction of humans. So we could literally drive ourselves to extinction with some of these cultural ideas and activities. It's totally possible, right? And I would argue that I don't know if I mentioned this in all my classes, but there are cultures and populations that have gone extinct due to their memes, to some of the memes they invented. I think I mentioned some of the culture, some cultures that practice cannibalism, right? And so they had this belief or this meme of cannibalism, where I believe, if I remember correctly, the idea was if you eat the brain of the deceased, it somehow confers some advantage to you. It's sort of like almost like a religious ideology with this belief. But we know now that eating human brains is not good, because you can get disorders and diseases like from like prion-based diseases, and that causes the population to suffer and die. So there are definitely memes that can lead to extinction. Another example, I think if you think about the meme that could cause extinction for human, it's definitely technological memes. It's definitely technological memes. So like the invention of the atomic bomb and nuclear power, that's a meme, and that could easily wipe out humans if we get into like a nuclear war. There was another question that I wanted to get to. Yeah, so Anusha, a mole did answer your question, but the components that make natural selection occur faster. Natural selection, are you talking about natural selection or evolution? Because natural selection doesn't really have you can't really talk about a rate of natural selection. You can talk about the strength of the selection, right? How strong the selection pressure is. But so a stronger selection pressure, aka natural selection that's acting stronger, will increase the rate of evolution. So evolution you can speed up with stronger selection pressures, and species that have shorter generation times also evolve faster. Yeah, don't worry about prions. Prions are like a protein-based disease or pathogen that we can get from eating tissue, like nervous tissue, so like brain from organisms. There was a scare a while ago. I don't know if you remember mad cow disease. So there was some ground beef had gotten cow nervous tissue into it, and some people got some prion diseases from this mad cow. Mad cow disease is based off of a prion, which is a type of protein that causes disorders in people that consume it. Can someone explain selection pressures? Who's expert for light skin and dark skin people? Okay, I gotta clear something up with the whole skin color thing. I think I misspoke, and I had a misunderstanding about what the selection pressures were for skin color. In class, I said, and I actually said this to some people today directly, that the selection pressure for skin color is the vitamin levels. But I think it's more accurate now that I think about it, it's more, and I talked to some of the other biology teachers about this, and Miss Lerner sort of straightened me out on this one. I think had a misunderstanding of it, but the selection pressure is actually the UV light, and the different UV light at the different latitudes. So the selection pressure for light skin is the lack of UV light at the poles, and the selection pressure for dark skin is the abundance or the excess UV light at the equator. The vitamin levels are the mechanism by which the selection pressure acts. So the vitamins are affected by the environmental factor of UV light. So it's the UV light is selecting for dark skin at the equator because it decreases folate levels. So yeah. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up real quick. So Alicia, you mentioned that the selection pressures were the vitamin levels. I just want to clarify that that's not 100% on point. I had to send an email to some of the other bio teachers just to clear that up, and I think it's better to say that the selection pressures is the UV light. Maggie, so there's only one selection pressure. In that case, the selection pressure would be, yes, UV light is the selection pressure, but it's different. The selection pressure is different at the poles versus the equator, because at the poles, the selection pressure is the lack of UV light, but at the equator, it's the excess UV light. So I guess you could say the selection pressure is the amount of UV light. Anisha, can I give an example of stabilizing, disruptive, and directional? Yeah. Stabilizing selection would be something like you have a trait that ranges from tall through medium to short, right? So like height. The selection that would be stabilizing that would be when you have selection on the middle height. So the short people and the tall people are selected against, and the medium height people are selected for. So over time, the height gets more and more toward the middle of the trait, towards the medium height. That's stabilizing. Disruptive selection would be like when you have these people where the tall and the short are actually the beneficial traits. So being short gives you an advantage and being tall gives you an advantage. But being in the middle, like a medium height, gives you a disadvantage. So over time, there becomes more short and more tall individuals, but less middle height individuals, less medium. And then directional would be an example of, let's say, short is selected against and tall is selected for. So there's a disadvantage to being short and an advantage to being tall. So as time goes on, more and more people become taller and taller. So the average height goes towards tallness. Yeah, I'm just trying to clear up that mole. I'm clearing it up. I spoke in class. I said it was vitamin D and folate, but actually the selection pressure is the UV rays, because the selection pressure is, we have to talk when we talk about what the selection pressures are, we usually talk about things in the environment. And so the vitamin levels are not in the environment, they're in the organism, in the humans. But the thing in the environment that's causing those is the UV rays. So that makes more sense to say the selection pressure is the UV rays and not the vitamin levels. The real Akash, disruptive selection can lead to speciation? Yes. Disruptive selection can lead to speciation for sure. Yep. Rohit. What's up, Rohit? What is adaptive radiation? Adaptive radiation is this idea of rapid evolution after an environmental change. So let's say there's like a flood or, I don't know, a forest fire that wipes out a lot of the ecosystem and a lot of species die. After that, now you have a whole new ecosystem. Right now the forest is burned, so you have a different ecosystem. There's a flood, there's a different ecosystem. Species will evolve really rapidly in this to find and evolve to this changed environment. That's adaptive radiation. Let's see if I can find an example of adaptive radiation. Oh, let's see. I guess this is decent enough. So in this one, you see like kind of the example where you have an initial bird that eats seeds, And over time, let's say there's a bunch of different islands. The birds will go to the different islands where there's different foods, and they will evolve quickly to get different beaks to take advantage of those different food sources. Quran, so like convergent evolution is speciation? No, no. Convergent evolution is not speciation. Two different things. Divergent evolution could lead to speciation, but convergent evolution, no. Divergent evolution leads to speciation. Could I explain antibiotic resistance? So, Anusha, for antibiotic resistance, you should know essentially the video lecture. I don't know, Anusha, if what class you're in. If you're in Miss Lerner's class, you might not have seen the video lecture. But I did a video lecture. If you want, you can look at it on my channel. It's video lecture number 18 in my video lecture playlist that I talked about antibiotic resistance. It's a long video lecture. It's the longest video lecture that we have. It's like 26 minutes or so. But you should know this main idea is that you have bacteria and they evolve really rapidly because they have very short generation times. So within a couple days, you can have a whole new generation of bacteria, which is fast. It's a fast evolution. And they are susceptible to a kind of chemical called an antibiotic. So typically when a bacteria is exposed to an antibiotic, it will die. And we know that bacteria infect humans and cause disease and disorders in humans. So we have been able to create medicines using antibiotics to kill the bacteria that infect us. But because bacteria evolve really quickly, they can evolve resistance to these antibiotics, and sooner rather than later, we notice that some of these bacteria are now no longer affected by the antibiotic. So we get sick, we take the antibiotic, and it doesn't cure us because they've evolved resistance. And this is a problem, obviously, because it's a human health issue. People that get infected with bacteria, if we don't have medicine to treat them, they can die and get really sick. And so this whole problem of resistance that that bacteria have evolved it will occur naturally. Bacteria will always evolve resistance to antibiotics in a natural way because that's just the way evolution works. But it's happened really, really fast because humans are misusing antibiotics, and we're using them in a way which speeds up the evolution of bacteria in terms of the resistance to them. And so if you want more detail on that, you should take a look at that video lecture number 18. Rita, what leads to homologous structures? Divergent evolution leads to homologous structures. So basically, if you have two species, or if you have, let's say you have one species, and then over time that species evolves and now you have two populations evolving, and now we have two new species. They would usually have some sort of homologous structure. So for example, like whales and humans. We had a common ancestor that had a very similar structure to us in terms of let's say a human arm has all the same kind of bones that a whale's flipper has. And that's because even though they have different functions, right? A whale's flipper is for steering in the water, and a human arm is, for like manipulating objects and things like that. But if you look at the bone structure, they're actually the same. So they're homologous structures that occurred due to divergent evolution of a common ancestor between whales and humans. Harvey Weinberg. I think it's a Harvey Weinstein in Equilibrium. Harvey Weinberg, not Harvey Weinstein. Two very different things. Harvey Weinberg is about genetic equilibrium and evolution. Harvey Weinstein is somebody who never really evolved. What else? What else? What else? Any other questions in here? So what's the difference between gene flow and genetic drift? Um, Dog Rusty, yes, that's correct. But gene flow, yeah, is basically when organisms move in or out of a population to another population. So gene flow is anytime you have two populations and individuals are going in between them. So leaving one population going into another. There's genes flowing between the two populations. Genetic drift is sort of a separate idea in which you have one population that over time their allele frequencies change because due to just the random statistics of meiosis and inheritance. So genetic drift is when evolution or when allele frequencies change due to random chance and not due to natural selection. Yeah, that's the bottleneck effect, the bottleneck effect and founder effect. Yeah, those are ones that I get asked a lot. People get confused about the founder effect and the bottleneck effect. They can be related to each other, but they are kind of two different things. So let's start with the bottleneck effect, just to be clear. So the bottleneck effect is when you have, they show it, it's this idea of like when you take let's say a bunch of different individuals in a population, right? So here's your population on the left, the parent population. You've got a bunch of different individuals in there, each with different traits. So the different colors represents the variation amongst the individuals. So just keep that in mind. And then you take that bottle and you pour it out really quickly, and you allow some to escape out, right? So let's say the neck of the bottle represents some sort of drastic reduction in population size. So maybe it's like a flood or a fire or an asteroid impact or some crazy environmental change that kills most of the parent population, and the only ones that make it through the bottleneck are the survivors. So the surviving individuals are here in the third diagram, the third part of this diagram, right? So they're the ones that survived. Everyone else died. Those ones will go on to create a new generation, but you'll notice that the bottleneck effect is when you get the result of a drastic reduction in population causes the generation that comes after that effect to be slightly different than the original population. So you'll notice that the first bottle, the parent population, has some red in there. So it has some individuals that have this trait, this redness trait. Those are no longer present in the next generation because they were killed during the bottleneck effect. So that's what we mean by the bottleneck effect. The founder effect, on the other hand, is very similar, except instead of the only difference really between a founder and a bottleneck effect is that a bottleneck effect is due to some sort of drastic reduction in population where most of the species, most of the individuals die. The founder effect is when it's not that they die, it's just that a subgroup, a small group of individuals just leaves the original population and founds a new population somewhere else. But it's the same result, right? So in the mother population, you have sort of, it looks almost like a 50-50 mix between red and, sorry, that's purple and yellow. And then just due to random chance, that population that left only had one purple. So as that new population grows, the ratio of yellow to purple is going to be different than the original population. So again, you have a different new population than an old population because of the random founders didn't represent the initial population accurately. And the same thing is true of the bottleneck effect. Except instead of a little subgroup leaving, it's just that everyone dies except for a few that survive. Looks like you guys are, what's going on? Let's see. Let's see. Looks like there's some people who are talking about binary fission. Anusha asks, are horizontal gene transfer and binary fission related? Or are they two separate processes that bacteria undergo? That's not going to be on my tests. I mean, I don't know, that might appear in other people's, other classes, but binary fission is essentially like, is basically mitosis, is when a bacteria divides to create one bacteria divides and becomes two bacteria. That's binary fission. It doesn't have anything to do directly with horizontal gene transfer. Horizontal gene transfer is essentially when you have two bacteria that can then share DNA. So one bacteria can give some DNA to another bacteria and transfer some genes horizontally into the other bacteria. So there are two things that bacteria do, but they're not necessarily directly related. Let's see. So it looks like, Catherine, you're trying to get a little help with the antibiotic resistance VIST. You said you got a point off for the variation piece. I mean, so you have to think about, like, okay, you have a group of bacteria, right? Some are going to be more resistant than others. So if you want to answer the V part of VIST correctly with the bacteria antibiotic resistance piece, you would need to say something along the lines of, in a population of bacteria, some bacteria are going to be more resistant than others to the antibiotic, right? So there's variation in how resistant some bacteria are. Some bacteria are more resistant and some are less. Where does that variation come from? It comes from mutations, random mutations during mitosis. That's how you would get full credit on a VIST there, on the V part for VIST. Anusha, is there any relationship between the amount of vitamin D and melanin in your body? Yeah, so basically the idea with that would be you would typically, the less melanin you have, the more vitamin D you would produce, because vitamin D production is triggered by sunlight. And so if you have, and so melanin blocks sunlight. So the less melanin you have, the more sunlight you're exposed to, and the more vitamin D is produced. So there is a relationship there for sure. New, what is coevolution? Yep, Amol, as usual, nailed it. When two species become the selection pressures for each other. So a good example of coevolution would be when you have the classic example that I always give, just to be clear, it's a clear and concise example, is pollinators evolving alongside the plants that they pollinate. So let's say you have a flower that's pollinated by a bee. That bee will evolve to be attracted to that flower because it can get nectar from it, and that's nutrients. And the flower will evolve to be attractive to the bee because when the bee lands on the flower, it picks up some of the pollen, and then it will go to another flower and deposit the pollen on that other flower, which is how plants reproduce. So the plants get a benefit because they can reproduce better, and the bee gets a benefit because it gets nutrients, which allows it to survive and reproduce better. And they evolve in response to each other. So as the flower gets more attractive to the bee evolves to be more attracted to that flower, and so they form a tight relationship like that. The real Akash, could we see a sample perfect VIST for the quiz question? I don't have that on hand. I'm sorry, I don't have that on hand for you. The random and non-random parts. Yeah, so Rita, the non-random part is the natural selection part. The random components are the mutations. Yvonne, the selection pressure for dark skin color is UV light. High amounts of UV light select for darker skin. Yeah, Catherine, if you go back to the very start of this live stream, I kind of gave like an intro to it with covering the main topics. So go watch the very beginning of it and let me know if you have a question after you take a look at that. So, Alicia, just to clarify, Amol is trying to help you with horizontal gene transfer, but yeah, it's not for reproduction. Mitosis is for reproduction for bacteria, but bacteria can do horizontal gene transfer where they can share genetics between individuals in the same generation. So they can pass some genes from one individual bacteria to another, and it's not for reproduction purposes though. It's just sharing genes. New, did human skin color evolve from light to dark or dark to light? Um, it would be, that's a good question. I don't know if we really know the answer. Like, what did it start out as? All we know is that, and that's not really that important to know. You just need to know how it evolved, or you need to know the rationale behind why light skin evolved in certain areas on the Earth and why dark skin evolved in certain areas on the Earth. Looks like if people are still talking about UV light. You don't need to know the different types of UV. Just need to know that UV light itself causes the deterioration of folate and causes the production of vitamin D. Yeah, so. What's up, Shanna? You have a question about apes. Why would alkalinity of rainwater increase as it runs through the soil? Well, soil contains things like calcium and carbonate ions, which which will absorb some of the hydrogen ions in water. So what makes rainwater acidic is the amount of hydrogen ions that are in there. And so as the rainwater percolates through the soil, there are these things like calcium and carbonate ions in the soil, and other sort of compounds that would make the water more basic, which is what we mean by alkaline. So high alkalinity means more basic. And so as the water goes through the soil, the hydrogen ions are kind of absorbed, or taken out of solution by these calcium and carbonate ions. And so as the water goes through, it becomes more basic or more alkaline. Rohit, you asked, founder effect changes allele frequencies, leads to genetic drift, right? It can, yeah, it can. It's possible for the founder effect to lead to genetic drift. I wouldn't say they're the exact same thing, but the founder effect could create a population that then goes through the process of genetic drift. Yvonne, is there going to be stuff about plasticity on the test? No. No. The word plasticity just means ability to change or ability to be modified. So if something is considered plastic, it's easy to change or something like that. But we're not gonna talk about it. We didn't talk about it. Ashley, exactly how do you differentiate between macro and micro evolution? The way I would sort of phrase it is macroevolution is occurring on a large scale with whole organisms changing, and like speciation is a good example of macroevolution, or large scale changes to polygenic traits. Microevolution is more on a smaller scale, so shorter time periods, the change in allele frequencies over time on a short period. So like a single trait changing or a single gene changing. Mary Jane, how are natural selection and genetic drift similar? They both cause a change in allele frequencies and can lead to evolution. The difference is that one is random and one is non-random. Genetic drift is random, natural selection is non-random. So the other thing, yeah, Catherine, I don't know if what class you're in, but you might be in a class that didn't really talk about lactose intolerance or lactase persistence. But in my class, we did kind of talk about that. That was one of our last topics. So Jones Barbecue and Foot Massage. I actually have to look up that place. I don't believe you that there's such a thing. I don't believe you. Okay, that looks like something I might have to watch on my own time because I don't think I can watch that right now. I'm worried, I'm scared to click on it. I'm scared to click on it, so I'm gonna leave it for now. Amal, imagine a non-sentient molecule suddenly splitting in two, creating energy and destroying the entire universe. What are you talking about? A non-sentient molecule? I don't think one molecule splitting in two could destroy the entire universe. And I don't think it could create energy because the first law of thermodynamics is energy cannot be created or destroyed. Just people just starting to spam Joan, Jone, J1. Oh yeah, I forgot about Alicia, good point. I forgot about the oxygenation, great oxygenation event, right? Or the video we watched about that one time oxygen almost killed everything. So that's like that's like this idea, like an important concept that there was this point in history when you had a moment. So I'll just kind of maybe I'll just kind of go over that real quick because there is some questions, at least one or two questions in the test about the Great Oxygenation event. So I'll just kind of cover that real quick. So in the beginning of Earth, like beginning way back, you have very little oxygen on Earth, right? And so what you mostly have are organisms that are anaerobic or do not need oxygen to survive. So for example, humans, we need oxygen for cellular respiration to produce ATP, a form of energy that we can use to survive. But before there was a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere, you have these organisms, these microorganisms that don't need oxygen. And so they're doing their thing. And then over time, as evolution happens, there are some species that evolve and evolve the ability to do photosynthesis. So this new evolutionary advantage happens. And now you have some organisms that can do photosynthesis, right? So they start using light and carbon dioxide to produce sugar for themselves and energy. But we all know that a product of photosynthesis is oxygen. So as these species of photosynthetic organisms, they're these kind of bacteria that do photosynthesis, start producing more and more oxygen and using up carbon dioxide. And so what happens is the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere starts to go down as they do photosynthesis, and the amount of oxygen starts to go up. Now, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It traps heat on Earth and keeps it warm. Because the amount of CO2 is going down, because all these photosynthetic bacteria are absorbing that carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, the Earth starts to get colder and colder and colder as there's no more CO2 to hold the heat in. So what ends up happening is the Earth goes into an ice age, a glacial period, and everything freezes over, and a lot of organisms die. But over time, slowly, as those organisms die and they're decomposed, they release their CO2 back into the atmosphere starts to warm again, the ice melts, and the remaining organisms on Earth that made it through that extinction event where most species died, that could have been the end of life. That glacial event could have killed all the species. But it didn't. Some survived and made it through, and then they started to evolve, and we see all the species we see today came from that moment after that sort of sketchy moment where we had that glacial period. So that's why it's called that one time oxygen almost killed everything, because the oxygen production from all those photosynthesizers changed the environment big time. Let's see. Ashley, no, you do not need to know binomial nomenclature or taxonomy. We didn't cover that. Don't worry about it. So what time do we got here? Let's see. What time is it? 8:50? I might be calling it quits here in a moment. I might be calling it quits here in a moment. I hope I answered everyone's questions enough. I hope we feel a little more prepared. You have to remember that like a video stream like this, a live stream like this, is not going to save you or like make or break your grade. Most of the work that you've put in of studying and keeping up with the material over the last month or so is what's going to make or break your grade. This is just a little icing on the cake, just getting some last minute clarification on some things, maybe kind of practicing, hearing a different perspective from me or other people in the chat who help. Which, by the way, just so real quick, I have to always give a big shout out to all you guys in the chat who are answering other people's questions for me. And that's awesome. I appreciate all you guys out there that do that. I know a variety of you do that, but just always going to be really, really, really useful. Um, so those of you that have been, I know there's a few of you guys out there that are like sort of been in the chat kind of all year helping with questions. For you guys, I give a special big shout out. So maybe, yeah, maybe keep that up. Also, if you're interested in being a TA, that kind of contribution is definitely TA status, because I could always use TAs in the future to be maybe mods, like chat mods when we do live streams like this. Mr. Chang, man, yeah, man, I've been good. Things have been going really well. I'm in a good spot. I hope things are going good for you too. I hope you're enjoying your campus security position and all that kind of stuff. Is that still going good? You kind of settling into that job a little bit, enjoying it? Ashley, for cultural evolution, what is an example of the selection pressure? Good question. A selection pressure for cultural evolution is essentially it's hard to really say. It would be the will of the people in the society. So it would be what the society directs the changing of that idea. So it would be like selection pressure would be like the usefulness of the idea to the benefit of humans. So something like that. It's a little more complex to talk about selection pressures when we talk about cultural evolution. But for example, like let's say you have two competing ideas. The one that's going to stick around, right, is going to be the one that offers more of a benefit to humans, or that humans find more useful. So what? Doing the night shift, nice. You'll have to let me know if you have any like interesting experiences as a campus security. I bet you might, before you're through with that gig, might find some interesting moments. College kids can be up to no good sometimes. Mo, what's the difference between studying and joining Jones's live stream? I would say there's definitely some overlap. Like there's a Venn diagram there where both will help you on the test. But I would say the key difference is that studying, you can sort of direct on your own, whereas on a live stream, you're going to have to hear a lot of things that maybe you already know. So it might not be as useful for you. It's not as targeted as like studying on your own, because then you can pick exactly what you study for. No problem, Manusha. Anytime, anytime. Same, Catherine. I hope you guys do well on your test tomorrow. I hope things are done good for you. Samuel, what's up? Fashionably late to the party. You're arriving to the party just as it's sort of winding down, my dude. Is the test going to cover the material we learned only after the quiz? No. The test is cumulative from the very beginning of the unit. So there's overlap for sure. Mr. Chang, dude, stay safe, man. I don't want you getting hit by a car out there. You know, I think these live streams, so these live streams are something that I started doing 2 years ago. I came with the idea. I don't know if you look back on my channel. I mean, I've done so many of these. I would say I started it maybe over 2 years ago. The idea of it. I don't know. Are they they're helpful to you guys? Like, I want to make sure it's not like a waste of time. I feel like they're helpful. I mean, I get a sense that it helps you to have like a little moment where you can ask questions and get answers, and you can see me and I can explain things and I can pull up diagrams. I also would ask, is there any, you guys have any feedback for me on live streams? Like, is there a way that I can make them better for you, like more useful? Is what I'm doing okay? Like where I'm kind of just talking and I pull up diagrams to go over concepts, good enough? I don't know. If you have any ideas for how to make them more useful or things that you'd like to see me do to make them a little better, I'm open to that kind of feedback. But I think they're good. I like them. I prefer them. I prefer them to like study sessions, to in like in real life study sessions, because those can get a little crazy and chaotic when a bunch of people, like, let's say we have 40 people watching here. If we have 40 people in a room, it gets loud, um, and it's not so easy as here, where I think it's a little more easy. Okay, good. I'm glad to see that they're super helpful. Nice. Okay, I'll take that as I'll take it as um, I'll take that as positive feedback. I don't think that the live stream is gonna, like I said before, I don't think a live stream is gonna make or break your grade. I think it adds an opportunity, like I said, just to sort of like get some clarification. But I'm glad to hear people are saying they're super helpful. 10 out of 10. Nice. Thanks, Amrita. Thanks, Emilian. I know, Emilian, I know they're helpful for you because you're always on here. You pop in all the time. You ask good questions. Catherine, thank you. You ask good questions too, by the way. You guys ask some good questions. I would say the one thing I'll give feedback to people is just, if a question is really straightforward, like you could just Google it, try not to ask those kinds of questions. Like, so you could say like, oh, what is punctuated equilibrium? You can just Google punctuated equilibrium and read a little bit, and you can probably get the idea. But if you do that and you're still not sure, then you can ask like a clarifying question, like a specific thing about punctuated equilibrium. Those would be, I would say, a better use of your time to get those kinds of questions answered. And it's also a better use of my time and everyone else's time, because then I can talk about things that are not as easy to look up. But Dog Rusty, thanks for that feedback. Try to read the chat to see if someone has answered questions already, so the questions that need to be responded to. Yeah, I mean, I could probably do a better job. The problem is I need to sometimes make sure that the answers given are correct and on point, because sometimes most of the times when you guys respond to each other, you nail it. Like most of the time it's good. I would say sometimes I notice the answers are too brief or not explained clearly enough. Like I think some of you guys know your stuff, and then when you respond and you answer, you put it just like in a bullet point format, like really, really quick. Like a mole, you would do this especially. Like you'll just write like, it's this, this, and this, which I think in your head makes sense because you understand it. But to someone who's still trying to grapple with it, they might need a little more explanation. So I kind of try to run through it a little more to help with that. But yeah, I agree. I can skip some things sometimes if I feel like they're answered well. Alicia, I can encourage people to check their notes more. That's true, Akash. You are the people that watch, so you're not the best sample. So I guess the people that are on here are the people that find it useful. The people that aren't are the people that don't find it useful. So maybe, yeah, maybe I have to ask. I have to do a different way of ask. I have to like ask the class, do a survey in class or something. Maybe I'll do that at the end of the year. Do a little Google survey to get some feedback on the live stream situation. Itai, how do you say that? Itai? Thanks for the feedback, man. You need some more gameplay. Yeah, it's tricky because the gameplay, that's fun to do. Just the problem is when we do these streams, I can't really play a game and answer questions as good as I would like. So I kind of have to sort of leave the gameplay to the side. I remember when I first started these, I thought I could multitask. Like I could have a game going and answer questions, but I soon learned that my brain isn't that great and I cannot sort of do that very easily. So And they got more popular. The live streams got, especially when there's a lot of people asking a lot of questions. It just doesn't leave a lot of time for me to play the game if I'm going to keep up with the questions. I got it. I love. Is your brother Guy? I think I have your brother in Apes, Guy Labney. Okay. Oh, Etai. Got it. All right. Yeah. I guess I'm gonna call it. I'm throwing the towel. Call it a night. Call it a night. So again, big ups. Thank you guys. Fist bump to those of you guys that worked to answer questions. You know, I can't thank everybody because I know there's a lot of people, but Amol, Akash, Dog Rusty, I don't know you in real life. Maggie, thank you guys for answering questions. And everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you guys do well. I hope you guys do well. I will see everyone on the next stream. You know, we're starting to get into the pig dissection, which you guys, just an FYI, I think this is just a little bit of a heads up. I think you will be the last class that I do pig dissections with. I don't think I'm going to continue doing dissections anymore after this year, because I've had a slow transition in my life to being aware of issues related to sort of animal ethics, and I kind of came to this conclusion recently, and it was too late for this year because we had already ordered the fetal pigs and everything. But I'm thinking at some, like next year, I'm going to go ahead and not do the fetal pig dissection, because I just think it's kind of a, I mean, I've changed my diet. Like I'm mostly vegan now. I try to stay away from animal products because I just don't like the way that we treat animals in this country, at least. I think there's ethical ways that you can do that, but I think with a pig dissection, the fetal pigs we use, I'm not it's just not in my moral compass, and my ethics and my values don't align with that anymore. Now that I'm more aware of it, so I think that's the road I'm headed down. Right? So I think if I want to be like morally consistent in my own head and live my life like that's aligned with my values, I think that's kind of my route. But again, we're gonna have to I'm gonna have to talk, and I don't know if all the teachers will go that route, but for me, I'm getting at that point where I'm thinking that makes the most sense for me, right? Because if I'm somebody who has decided that eating meat raised from cows or pigs or chickens in this country, like through factory farms, is not ethical, which I don't think it is, then is really dissecting fetal pigs ethical if it's a similar process of animal suffering and lack of well-being? So yeah, so I've kind of gone that route where my own values have sort of shifted. So, but that being said, we got one more year. We'll do it this year. We'll get it done. We'll learn a lot. But yeah, okay. All right. Peace in the Middle East. I'll see y'all later. Good luck. Appreciate y'all. I am out. Have a good night.